Hey, geeks and geekettes. Time for another edition of Ask Chuck Dixon. I know I said number 12 would be, might be the last one, but well, it turns out 13 is your lucky number because I'm going to answer more questions without putting up a paywall or asking you to subscribe to this particular series. Although over at Unauthorized TV, I've got over 80 videos that go into a lot more depth than these question and answer videos happen to do. So you might want to consider that. But for now, I guess I'll keep doing these, but I can only keep doing these with your help. If you could please pass the word on these videos, share on social media, tell your friends, tell your mom, I don't know, tell somebody. Um, Help spread the word about these videos to get the audience up for them. So, quite frankly, they're worthwhile for me to do. Uh, I'm ranging between 300 and 400 views on each of these videos. I'd like to see that go a lot higher. I think there's a potential audience for this. The problem is, how do you let people know about it? That is the age-old question because, there are gatekeepers in social media who limit your reach. That's simply the cold hard facts of providing internet content on these services. Anyway, the other housekeeping thing here is I've seen a few comments that with problems with the volume is too low. I have fixed this through the technical wizardry of moving the mic closer to my face. I hope this works. Okay, let's go on to our first question. And it is, do you have any stories to tell about dealing with the guy behind Deluxe Comics? I've heard stories. Well, Glenn, you may have heard them. I haven't. I don't even know what Deluxe Comics is, so I never dealt with them. Okay, are there any publishers you feel like you missed the boat on? No. There's a couple I wish I'd missed the boat on, but no, there's not really anybody out there that I would have wanted to work for. I mean, maybe Tower Comics, but they went out of business when I was 11, so I, that was never possible. Okay, how is writing a paperback series like Avenging Angels different than comics, and how is it similar? Um, yeah, I do. I've contributed a couple of novels to a monthly Western novel series called The Avenging Angels. A whole bunch of really really talented writers, Paul Bishop and Peter Brandvold and Mel Odom and Mike Barron, and a few others. We all write under the name A.W. Hart, and it's fun. It's somebody else's universe, somebody else's Bible that I have to follow, and but they're westerns, so the sky's the limit. Westerns are so wide open, so broad a genre. As long as I come up with a decent plot that I like, it has to go through my approval first, and then I'll submit it. And I guess in the last year I've written two of these. I may write a third. I have an idea for a plot line. If they need me to, I might come in for a third novel. But yeah, prose is different than comics. I've talked about this before, and these aren't the only novels that I've written. Um, you know, I've written, I think, 26, 27 novels at this point. Um, but yeah, prose is different because you have to artfully describe to a reader the environment, the characters, and the action instead of very functionally, pragmatically describing it to an artist. You don't have to be artful to an artist. Although I've seen script. Doug Mensch is very artful when he describes things to artists. I'm not. I'm just like I need this, I need this, I need this in the panel to help carry the story over. And however you want to put them in the panel, that's up to you. Anyway, I don't have to think about any of those things. In prose, you also don't have to think about um, uh, page turns. You just have to think about chapter ends. Page turns, every single page has to make you want to turn to the next page. It's not so true in a novel. But you do want to end a novel's chapter on a line that will make them want to continue, or a cliffhanger situation. That's just standard novel stuff. Um, and the biggest difference between comics and prose that I've found is the well, two differences actually. One is the average reader's ability to imagine, and they're not constricted by an artist's style or a visual guide, so they can imagine the characters and situations to be whatever they see in their mind, drawn from their experience or pictures they've seen or just out of whole cloth. And that's kind of cool because you're painting pictures in the reader's mind, and every picture is different. So you got to learn to sort of leave the reader room to imagine what you're talking about. You don't want to be too specific. You don't want to be too nailed down. And if you do have specific details, you got to get to them early because you don't want to be telling your readers that your main character only has one leg on page 70 because they've already pictured him with two. Uh, so, or three, I don't know, if you're writing science fiction. The other big difference is the stories kind of end themselves. I'm often surprised when I come to an end of a novel that I'm writing that I'm like, hey, you know what? This is the end. This is the place to end. And I'm not much on denouements. So when the story's over, the novel's over. So that's a big difference. Now, I love writing the Western novels. I'd written one before doing these Avenging the Angels, and it's probably my favorite genre to work in. So I am working with Mr. John Neal on revisiting our paperback novel series, The Sidewinders. And these are some cover roughs by Val Merrick. We're going to be working on new covers. I really don't like ebook covers, so I want to do something more traditional. I've already got permission from the publisher to basically package these books with covers designed by myself and Val. And but we're going to do a series of Western novels set in a shared universe, different characters, and it should be a whole lot of fun. It has been a whole lot of fun. Snake Hand is the first. It's available on Amazon, but we're going to repackage it, and I'm going to do a write through, do a little rewriting on it, make it a new edition, bring it in line with the series we have it planned. But I'm near completion on a second novel. John Neal is near completion on a third novel, and then I'm going to start a fourth novel. And once I'm done with the four novels, or at least well into the fourth Sidewinders novel, we'll publish because it'll give me a schedule that I can keep up with. But I have written other novels. The one I'm most proud of is Shrinkage. It's about a shoplifter in Philadelphia in the 1970s. It's my hard-boiled crime novel. And Bad Times, which is a series, time travel series about a bunch of ex-Army Rangers traveling through time. That's 6 books. Levon's Trade. It's the first book in the Levon Cade series, which is now up to 7 books. I'll be starting the 8th book in just a few weeks. So yeah, I'm a comic book writer. That's my DNA. But I've learned to enjoy prose. It's a new medium for me. I mean, I read a lot of prose, but writing and reading are 2 different things, my friends. And yeah, I'm starting to enjoy it. So on to our next question. Levi Sweeney says, or he asks, do you have any advice, pro tips, or best practices for writing war stories? I asked this very same question to Archie Goodwin when I first started working for him. How much research do you do? And Archie said just enough to fake it. Now, Archie was being a little facetious because I knew he did a lot more than he needed just to fake it. Because if you ever read his war stories, they're meticulously researched, even down to the language the characters speak. But and that's it. That's what you got to do to write war comics. It's a different genre. It used to be one of the most popular genres in comics, even into the 1970s. The top-selling books at DC and Marvel were their war comics, and Marvels were all reprints at that point. It's a sturdy medium because of the ability of the comics to relate detail and things like that. Meticulous historical detail because it's an illustrative medium. War comics are a natural. There's lots of action. You never need an excuse for action in a war comic. It's war. And that's something you have to remember, that these are primarily, action stories, and they require action, and they require research. You're going to have to do research. You're going to have to be at least somewhat conversant with your subject matter. So you got to hit the books. Um, but the books don't tell you everything. And this is something I urge anybody who's writing in the war genre, be it prose or comics, or even if you're not writing in the war genre, talk to vets. When I was growing up, a lot of the dads in the neighborhood, dads and uncles and rest, had been to World War II. And I was a little kid. I used to pester them with questions. And I kept on doing that all the way up until I was an adult. And I'll tell you, pestering guys recently back from Vietnam was not a good idea. But they would share when they realized that I was interested. I wanted to hear their stories. I wanted to hear what they went through. I appreciated what they had done, and they understood. I thought of them as heroes, and I wanted to know. And guys were reticent to talk about combat, of course, and I never asked questions about combat, but they would tell you all the ancillary stuff around the bad stuff, and the little bit they would tell you about combat told you a lot. But mostly it got me into I'm not going to say it got me into the head of guys who had seen combat, but at least gave me a glimpse into what their lives were like, and most importantly, um, how they uh, how they talked to each other, terminology they used, and of course this is for recent wars. Obviously, if you're writing about the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, the ancient Romans, you're going to have to once again, you know, hit the books. But I, I've always taken every opportunity, and I've had a lot of opportunity to talk to vets, even Afghan and Iraqi war vets, because of my work on GI Joe. I met a lot of young guys and gals back from downrange uh, because I wrote the GI Joe, and I would go to conventions and store appearances. Um, and I did a store appearance near a local air base, and a bunch of them came over, and they brought me a mug from Special Operations, and they said that this one staff sergeant assured me that everybody on base who had an office had some sort of GI Joe memorabilia somewhere in that office. It was an action figure or a comic book cover or something that commemorated GI Joe. Uh, so yeah, it gave me an opportunity. But again, you got to go back to the books. This shelf represents part of my World War II library. And mostly these books are picture books. They're filled with photographs and diagrams and drawings. And if you're going to work in comics um, doing this kind of work, doing war comics, a lot of times you're going to have to provide visual aids to your artists. They're not going to have the in-depth morgues. Now the internet's a huge help, but it's not a help when you get down to what kind of cigarette lighter did a Japanese soldier use, and that's what these books are for. Because you want to be accurate. You want to be as accurate as possible. For one, it respects the past, and number two, um, the accurate item always looks cooler than anything an artist could make up. Reality in a war comic is much cooler than the fiction, and much more engaging. And but in addition to picture books, you're going to want to read books. And the best books on war, you can read about, how many, uh, machine guns a Sherman tank had, or the cruising speed of a PT boat. That's not going to help you if you're writing fiction. You're going to have to get into the minds of guys who actually saw combat. And the best for me is first person accounts like this. With the Old Breed by E.B. Sledge was written by Sledge for his children and grandchildren. It was never meant to be published. And he writes this very candid, very frank memoir about fighting in the South Pacific as a United States Marine. Just shocking stuff. But he also shares a lot of his thoughts and emotions, and in a. I mean, he never set out to be a writer, but the guy just has a facility for language and plain speaking that's amazing. If you read this book, you'll come away with a better understanding, not only of these campaigns, but of the mind of a combat soldier entirely. A couple other books. I don't know if these are even in print anymore. Henry Berry did a series of books in which he interviewed vets, combat vets. Semper Fi Mac is World War II Marines. Hey Mac, where you been? Is Korea. which you hardly ever read about. The stories in that one are jaw-dropping. And then Make the Kaiser Dance, in which he interviewed, in this, I think in the 1970s, he interviewed every World War I combat vet he could find. The details you find in these books, and they're super easy to read, and they're in the language of the men serving. These are all first-person accounts that he recorded. Um, these are just eye-opening books about war. And you really, if you're going to write on a subject, you need to be somewhat conversant. I mean, superheroes, you know, blue sky it all the way. Anything you make up, it's just purely your imagination. But war comics, you really need a grounding of some kind. Uh, you can't just read war comics and then write war comics. You got to know a little bit more. If you're asking this question, I'm just assuming that you're interested, Levi, in this genre. No, it wasn't just a casual question. The other thing is to get some practical experience of your own. Um, I went down. I spent a long day, and it wasn't long for me. It felt like 15 minutes at the Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland, which is basically it's a military outpost in the woods in Maryland, but it's hundreds of acres and basically a parking lot for ordnance. And this is a German tank from World War II. But there's every kind of tank and weapon and cannon and gun imaginable just parked out on the grass in this place. They have a Leopold. Leopold cannon was those gigantic rail cannons that the Germans used in World War II. I was stunned when I got there and saw that. And then they have an enclosed building with lots of displays. They even have a Davy Crockett there. Davy Crockett was a portable nuclear weapon created in the 60s, just in case things went south in Europe. Sort of a spoil sport weapon. And yeah, it's just, if you ever go, and then, if you ever get a chance to fire weapons of the period, I fired a lot of rifles and handguns from the World War II period and earlier, and even fired some muskets. And having these things in your hand, knowing what they weigh, knowing what the feel of them is like. I'm notorious for going to gun shows and asking permission to pick up guns, vintage period military weapons, just to get the feel of them, you know. Um, and yeah, all of that, reading, practical experience, talking to vets, do it all, do everything. Make yourself more and more conversant with the genre. It's easier to write then. Your writing is going to be better. It's going to be more sure. It's going to be more of a pleasant experience the more that you know. Okay, Emilio Baracal. I don't know, I'm probably murdering that last name. Um, how do editorial decision making work? How much do editors influence story progress, or how much influence comes from even higher hierarchies? I understand if you can't talk about it, Chuck. Can't talk about it. I I never stop talking. I'm not afraid to talk about this stuff. I'm not. I never have been. I'm more on that later in this answer. Um, we recently lost Denny O'Neil, and it's a huge loss to comics. It's a huge loss to everybody. Loved him, but Denny was, the consummate comic book editor and the last of his breed, the last comic book editor of his type. The day that Denny retired was the beginning of the decline of American comics. Literally, I am not exaggerating. He was replaced by indifferent careerists. Denny was never a careerist. Indifferent careerists who really didn't care about the quality of the work. All Denny cared about was the quality of the work, the quality of the writing, the quality of the art, the quality of the packaging, cover design, everything. The guy cared. He cared about the medium. He cared about the readers. He cared about the comics. He cared about the characters. There was no, tongue in cheek with this guy. And but Denny would hire people that he knew were reliable. He told all of us writers, "You're professional storytellers. You know how to meet deadlines. You love doing this. That's why I hired you." We shared his passion, and with Denny, anything went. You could say what you wanted on any subject, and he encouraged it. He encouraged debate. He encouraged discussion, but he also encouraged you to understand he was the last word, and he was. He was the expert. And when you're writing Batman for the guy who basically saved Batman from obscurity, you're going to listen. You're going to listen to the man. And As far as, I'm using him as, like I said, an example, a microcosm of the way comics used to be. As far as dealing with the hierarchy or getting orders from above, if we got orders from the seventh floor at DC that Denny didn't agree with, Denny would fight. He would fight to protect his creators. He would fight for the ideas. He would fight for the integrity of the characters. He wasn't afraid of standing up to the people upstairs. And the people upstairs um, had respect for Denny, all due respect for Denny, because he'd earned it. They knew he knew his shit, and they stayed out of his way for the most part. And when they came up with an idea he didn't like, he let them know, and 9 times out of 10, he won out. But there was a great deal of cooperation. I don't want to intimate in any way that there was any kind of adversarial relationship between Denny and upper management or Denny and his team. At that time, we all saw ourselves as partners. We were all equal partners, publishers, editors, and creators in creating quality comics that people would want to read. They kind of lost that mission over the years, especially after Denny left. Denny wasn't the only guy. He was just the last guy. I mean, there were other great editors serving uh, during his tenure in comics, but he was the last one left. And when he left, it was all over. The other thing he would do is he would leave you alone. Unless you stepped out of line, and I heard about it a couple of times, he would leave you alone. He trusted your instincts, and he would even publish stories he didn't particularly like because he saw that they were either something that the writer was passionate about, or even though wasn't his cup of tea, it was something the readers would like. That's unheard of now. That is absolutely unheard of. He didn't micromanage. That's unheard of. Comics are more micromanaged now than ever. And the hierarchy, the people upstairs have more control than ever. The editors dance to the tune of the publishers and dance to the tune of the multinational entertainment conglomerates that own the company. There's no talking back to those people. Editorial caves every single time to the detriment of creative. Now, that's a problem I've always had, is that I can't shut up. Now, Denny liked that. Denny liked the pushback, and he hired writers who pushed back. I mean, I worked with Doug Mensch and Alan Grant, and they were even more outspoken than I was. You never had to worry or wonder what Doug or Alan were thinking. They'd tell you. That's kind of the, you know, the it's the Dilbert Principle. In Dilbert, a lot of the humor derives from the characters saying things to their superiors that no one would ever say in real life without getting fired. You would think it, but you'd never say it. In Dilbert, they say it. Well, I always just said it. If I thought it, I said it. I'm not an outspoken, extroverted kind of person, but when it comes to comics, I am. If I got an opinion, I want it to be heard, especially if I see things going the wrong way. And in the days after Denny, that got me in a lot of trouble. Even when I was right, and sometimes especially when I was right, I shit canned an entire year-long arc on a book, not Batman, on another book, because it was presented to us at a summit, and I just thought it was derivative crap that was going to drive the book sales even further into the dumpster than they were. And when the editors simply refused to listen to me, basically ended the meeting so that I couldn't talk anymore, make my argument anymore, I ended up going to the managing editors and saying, do you know what they're doing here? And of course that I was rewarded with, enmity over that. Made a lot of enemies in the room that day, but I was right. Maybe someday I'll tell you what a train wreck that was going to be. That'll probably be the next question. Chuck, tell us about the train wreck. Okay. My son Jonah wondered how fun it is to write comedy books like SpongeBob and The Simpsons. Is there a favorite part of the process? Yeah, the most fun part, I guess, when you come up with a joke that you really like, that's new and fresh. You kind of pat yourself on the back for your cleverness. Because sometimes when you're writing comedy, I don't know if this is true for everybody, but when you're writing comedy, it just kind of, you know, who knows where it comes from? It comes from a different part of the brain. Although comedy is very close to writing horror, a lot of the same elements, surprise, timing, setups, are all required in horror and comedy. So writing those two, because you're going for a visceral reaction from the audience. In one case, screams, in the other case, laughs. Um, there's spade work to be done in both of those genres. But anyway, the most fun part is when you come up with that gag that surprises you and you laugh at yourself. You laugh at what you just came up with. But comedy, for the most part, is hard. Like I said, it requires a lot of thinking, a lot of setup. But yeah, I did a lot of Simpsons, and I love the characters. I was conversant with the Simpsons universe from watching hundreds of episodes before getting to work on them. And but the the folks at Bongo, and I imagine Matt Groening, who was probably financing all of that, they understood that it was hard. So when the Simpsons comics were in publication, they were the highest uh, paid the highest page rates for writing of any other comic book company. Um, but I really enjoyed it, and I liked. Um, I don't know. I had like my personal bests. Uh, you know, gags I would come up with that I liked. Sometimes I came up with gags that I liked that no one else did. But what the heck? I'm sitting here alone in a room cracking myself up. So who cares? But you know, it was fun to write. It was fun to get into the characters, explore them, and boy, what a huge cast of characters! I think only GI Joe has a bigger cast of characters than The Simpsons. So whenever you needed a gag, you could always just turn to one of the other characters in the series, and also you got to make commentary on human nature and life on this planet, things like that, because Simpsons at the bottom of it all is a satire on you know our lives here on Earth, who we are as people. A lot of people say it's a satire on America. I think, The Simpsons appeals to everybody around the world because it's a satire on sort of universal situations and qualities people have. But and then my favorite character to write was Lisa. For some reason, I really liked writing Lisa. I tried to write as many Lisa-centric stories as possible, and I think that's because I don't know who shared this with me. I don't know if it was a Simpsons editor or if I read it in an interview. But James L. Brooks, who was executive producer of The Simpsons, like I guess still is, um, he told the writers, bunch of Harvard grads, yeah, the funny stuff's great, but don't be afraid to show heart. Don't be afraid to get into the personalities and characters and the emotions, the emotional life of these characters. And they heeded his words, and that's why The Simpsons is still around, because it's not just funny, funny, funny. It's you care about these characters. As crazy and ridiculous as the situations get, the characters have heart. And of all of them, Lisa has the most heart. She's the most easily wounded. She's always the one that's disappointed. She's kind of the Greek chorus and conscience. And I don't mean political or social conscience, pretty much the moral conscience. Because Lisa's perfectly capable of being hypocritical herself, but righteously hypocritical. But in the end, the one who always gets hurt the most in these stories by the decisions of the other characters, it's always Lisa. And sometimes it's her own decisions that hurt her. But yeah, that's what it was like. Now, SpongeBob, this is my favorite SpongeBob image ever. It's from an episode. This is my wallpaper on my computer. It has been for years. This image cracks me up. It was from a montage of SpongeBob presented in different genres, and pretty much that's what the SpongeBob comics were. Um, you trying to find new venues, new stories to tell. SpongeBob was fun to work on. Chris Duffy, who was the editor, and Steve Hillenburg, who oversaw everything, sometimes had, always had a hand in things, often made suggestions to make gags better. Although his idea of making a gag better was often to replace artwork with photographs he thought that was really funny, and it is. It is funny. It explains a lot of the cartoons that use uh, photographic images instead of cartoon images. But um, yeah, Chris called me when they went monthly. They did some specials for Nickelodeon, but when they were going to do a monthly comic, he called me because we had worked together at DC, and he was quite frank and said, we're going to need content, and I know you can provide content." Now he thought I knew nothing about SpongeBob. They're going to send me Bibles and comics and all the rest. I said, "It's really not necessary. I've got, you know, two kids who were prime SpongeBob age when it premiered. So I've literally seen almost every episode, and I really like it." And he says, "Well, let me send you the comics." And I said, "I already have them. I bought all the Nickelodeon's specials, SpongeBob specials, at the supermarket as they appear because I love them." And I really did love working on this comic. And during its run, I think it was the best comic book out there because so much thought and imagination was put into it. Every issue was completely different than the last. It did everything it could to explore the comic book genre. Um, and a lot of these, Chris would just unleash us. I mean, I would either pitch an idea and he would like it or not like it, or he would come to me with an idea. One of my favorites is he came to me and he said, "Look, SpongeBob is such an emotional wreck. He's so fragile emotionally. I want you to do a story that just pushes him to the limit." And so I did a story where SpongeBob, this amazing thing happens to SpongeBob, but he's alone when it happens and no one will believe him. And it just, by the end of the story, he's out of his freaking mind. It was so much fun to write. Yeah, we did this Shake-O-Rama. We were making fun of 3D and lenticular covers and stuff like that. And it was a story that I wrote in which an earthquake strikes Bikini Bottom, and there were captions on the page that told the kids, "Now shake the comic," to recreate the effects of the earthquake. I mean, stuff like that was a blast. And I would write, I mean, I would write 1 and 2 page and 3 page stories. I mean, Chris would literally email me and says, "Do you have a 1 page story? Do you have a two?" He needed to fill spots in issues, and it was a challenge and it was fun. And I explored the comics medium in ways I'd never explored it anywhere else because we were encouraged to do that, and it was a tremendous experience. And the characters are great. I mean, they're so funny on their own. They were easier to write for than the Simpsons because it's just more wide open. The story's more wide open, and the craziness, just the craziness. I mean, having campfires on the ocean floor. I mean, it's just it's just nuts. But I remember long email trains with Chris arguing over Patrick's motivations in a story because uh, we had a different idea, and I imagine all the creators had different ideas of just how stupid is Patrick. you know, uh, and we would have discussions about, would he be motivated to do this or that based on his lack of intelligence. And but stuff like that was fun. It was a tremendous creative process, and I love those characters to this day. And okay, let's move on to a darker subject. Um, Liren Shoham, boy, Liren, I hope I'm pronouncing your first name correctly. "Hey Chuck, what do you think of film noir? I heard you talk a lot about other genres, but I don't think about that." Okay, film noir. Film noir is I don't know, it's kind of a generally misunderstood film genre. Um, you know, a lot of people think it's every crime film made in black and white from like 1946 to 1957. And it's not. It's not. There's a lot of great crime films in that period that were not noir. Asphalt Jungle, The Killing. Um, Bogart made a few in that period. They're not noir films. Um, and the uh, parameters of noir, it's a French term, it means dark film or black film. The French are probably the biggest cinemaphiles on the planet, and they're very specific about what films should be included in the different genres that they've, you enumerated or named. Um, and film noir is Cornell Woolrich, who wrote in this genre. He wrote novels and short stories in this genre. He wrote Rear Window. Um, he described it best as it's the everyday gone wrong. Uh, you'll have a lead character in a film noir movie, and their life is going along. Maybe they're troubled, maybe they're not. Maybe they're successful, and something happens. Something triggers a change in their life, and all of a sudden, all bets are off. They're being hunted by the law, or a loved one is in danger, or they've made a moral decision that's corrupted them, so they can't return to their normal life. Whatever. They've been most famous example, DOA. They drank a poison that gives them only 24 hours to live, and they have to find the person that killed them, and possibly the antidote. So film noir is about a character who's lost control of his life. He's helpless. He's at the whims of fate. And I'm going to offer you two excellent examples of film noir. There's a Robert Mitchum movie where danger lives. And Mitchum is a surgeon. He's this really highly successful surgeon. And his life is going swell. Everybody thinks this guy's just aces until he runs into Faith Demerge. I guess that's how you pronounce her last name. And she's nuts. She's nutsy cuckoo. But he's, wildly attracted to her for some reason. And because she's, pretty much wildly attractive. And she's a little nuts, a little unpredictable. He doesn't realize quite how dangerous she is till it's way, way, way too late. And he's trapped in her web of intrigue. And, this is the femme fatale character. And there's a moment in where danger lives. It's this incredible encapsulation of what film noir is. There's a moment in which he's met this woman. He's not really involved with her yet in any way, but you can see it's going there. And he's in his home, and the doorbell rings, and he goes to answer it. And as he goes to answer it, the camera does this. I mean, it's only a few frames. The camera just sort of goes off kilter as it follows him. It gets in too close, and it gets a little blurry as he goes toward the door. And it's that moment that leaps off into film noir. From this point on, he will have no control over his life. He will make a decision when he opens that door that will forever send him down this dark path into a classic film noir, getaway story. In a company of this lunatic, dangerous lunatic. Another one that kind of flips the script from the femme fatale, Born to Kill. Again, Claire Trevor is troubled in this. She's on the run. She's in a town trying to establish a new life for herself, and she runs into Lawrence Tierney. And that's got another movie. It's got a great scene where everything goes off kilter and the everyday goes wrong. Where I won't ruin it for you, but she goes into a house that she shouldn't go into, and sees something she shouldn't have seen. Something Lawrence Tierney, um, wishes that she had not witnessed. But then, he's got to keep her close, and she's kind of drawn to him by this animal magnetism. And Tierney, you might know Tierney as he played Elaine Bennis's father on Seinfeld. You might remember the episode where Jerry and George have to have dinner with Elaine's dad, and Elaine can't make it. and you kind of see Lawrence Tierney. Reservoir Dogs is another movie that you might know him from. And apparently Tierney's screen persona and off-screen persona didn't have a lot of daylight between them. he was kind of dangerous and intimidating and wacky and short-tempered, but which made him perfect for film noir and perfect for films like this, as you can see from this still. But he was tall and good looking in kind of a weird way, and made him the perfect film noir guy. But but always the dangerous guy. So he was kind of a male femme fatale. So that to me that's what film noir is. It's you imagine you in your everyday life. You step out of the bus, you get out of your car, you go for a job interview and go to the wrong address, and everything from that point on, you literally can't go home again. You're in trouble deep, and there's no one to get you out of it. That's film noir. It's not a private detective story. It's not a cop movie. It's not a crime movie per se. It's it's about sex and death and moral quandaries. That's what film noir is. Okay, as I said before, I'm going to keep doing these, um, as long as I get viewership on YouTube. I'll keep doing these for free. But if you want to see more videos, as I said, more than 80, well over 80 and growing. I do new videos each week for unauthorized TV, and they go into more depth than these question and answer ones on a variety of subjects. So a little more freewheeling over there than YouTube. So if you want to check out unauthorized TV, otherwise, come back here. I'll try to do these on a weekly basis, and feel free to ask more questions. Ask questions. I can't do these without questions. You don't want me to start making up the questions. That's no fun. Anyway, that's it. Chuck Dixon out. I will see you down the road.